Picture the scene. A rider leans into a corner at impossible speed, knees inches from the asphalt, eyes locked on the apex. For decades, the style of racing at the highest level followed a script: clean lines, textbook precision, a dance of balance and control. Then came the revolution. Suddenly, riders began to hang off the bikes in ways that looked reckless but proved unstoppable, bending both their bodies and the sport's expectations. What seemed like showmanship turned out to be science in motion, and the world of MotoGP would never ride the same again. The transformation wasn't just about winning races. It was about redefining what it meant to control a motorcycle at the edge of physics. The question is, how did the legends behind those shifts change not only their own careers, but the entire sport's DNA? If you want to explore that evolution, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and comment on which riding style or era you want us to cover next. The story of MotoGP riding styles takes a dramatic turn with Valentino Rossi, because when Rossi emerged in the Premier class in 2000, he didn't just bring speed, he brought a whole new way of moving on the bike. Before his arrival, the common style was efficient and almost restrained, riders tucked tightly into the machine and leaning with predictable rhythm. Rossi broke that mold by exaggerating body movement, hanging off the bike in a looser, almost theatrical way that not only gave him control at the edge of grip, but also made him magnetic to watch. His elbows stretched wide, his upper body draped further off the seat, his braking zones a little deeper and more daring. Suddenly, the act of riding became a kind of signature, not just a technique. The appeal wasn't just to fans. Rivals and engineers alike had to study why Rossi's style worked, because the results were undeniable. He won championships, he drew unprecedented crowds, and he seemed to manage the impossible, combining consistency with creativity. Yet it wasn't pure artistry. Rossi's style gave him real technical advantages. By moving his body the way he did, he managed tire wear differently, controlled slides more gracefully, and influenced weight transfer in ways the traditional tucked-in posture never allowed. This wasn't only about personality. It was about extracting new performance from machines built with strict limits. And in those early 2000s, the stakes were sky high. Tire manufacturers competed fiercely, electronics were advancing but not yet dominant, and every edge mattered. Rossi's style became not just a personal trademark, but a reference point. Engineers tuned chassis stiffness and balance with his movements in mind. Rivals trained themselves to mimic parts of his technique, and fans suddenly judged every rider by how dynamic they looked in the corners. To understand how far-reaching this was, consider the cultural shift. Before Rossi, riders were admired for stoic precision. After Rossi, the rider became a showman, a performer, someone whose style mattered as much as the stopwatch. That raised the stakes for the next generation because to beat Rossi, you couldn't just be fast. You had to bring something radically new. Which brings us to the other half of this story, because while Rossi rewrote the textbook, Marc Marquez would later rip it apart entirely. Marc Marquez entered MotoGP in 2013, and immediately the Honda RC213V became the stage for something the sport had never quite seen before. Where Valentino Rossi had stretched the limits of body movement, Marquez took the concept and weaponized it, dropping his elbows to the ground, hanging half his torso off the bike, and saving crashes in ways that looked more like acrobatics than racing technique. His style wasn't born from pure flamboyance, but from necessity. The power delivery of his machine, the characteristics of the Bridgestone tires, and his fearless approach all converged into a riding form that defied conventional wisdom. At first, many thought it unsustainable. How could someone push beyond the edge of grip corner after corner without paying the price? But Marquez proved not only that it worked, but that it gave him a crushing competitive edge. His lean angles shattered records, his ability to pick up the bike earlier on corner exit maximized acceleration, and his reflexive saves using shoulders, knees, even elbows to wrestle the bike back upright became the stuff of legend. The impact on rivals was immediate. Suddenly, the grid was full of riders attempting deeper body hangoffs, searching for that same ability to stretch the contact patch and manipulate weight balance. Engineers responded by recalibrating chassis flex, electronics, and suspension to accommodate the demands of extreme lean angles, while commentators and fans debated whether this was genius or madness. Traditionalists feared it would shorten careers. Innovators saw it as the next evolution of MotoGP itself. And through it all, Marquez racked up wins and titles, showing that his radical riding wasn't just a trick but a system, a philosophy of how to bend motorcycle racing to human will. Yet in pushing the limits so aggressively, he also raised the inevitable question: what happens to a sport when one rider's style becomes the new standard, forcing every competitor to adapt or be left behind? That question sets the stage for the legacy that both Rossi and Marquez left behind, and how today's generation has been shaped by their extremes. By the mid-2010s, MotoGP riding styles had been permanently reshaped by Valentino Rossi and Marc Marquez, and the sport was left to reconcile what their extremes meant for the next generation. Rossi's looser, expressive movements had already redefined how a rider could influence tire life, line choice, and braking stability, while Marquez's radical elbow dragging and impossible crash saves pushed the biomechanical envelope into uncharted territory. Together, they set a bar that no one could ignore. The legacy wasn't confined to highlight reels. It rewired how young riders were trained, how engineers approached chassis design, and how teams scouted talent. Today, the MotoGP grid is filled with hybrids of their influence. Riders like Fabio Quartararo, Francesco Bagnaia, and others carry traces of Rossi's calculated flair and Marquez's aggressive body English, blending them into a style that feels both familiar and newly optimized for modern electronics and tire dynamics. You can see it in the way corners are attacked, in the choreography of braking zones, and even in how off-season training focuses on flexibility, reflexes, and body control rather than just raw fitness. The ripple effect goes deeper still. Fans expect spectacle now: saves, wild lean angles, flamboyant celebrations, because Rossi and Marquez made that the norm. Manufacturers, too, are locked in an arms race to build bikes that can sustain the punishment of these styles, adjusting aerodynamics, load distribution, and tire management systems to match. And yet, as much as their styles reshaped the technical side, they also injected new drama into MotoGP's identity. The sport is no longer seen as simply about speed and precision. It's about personality and audacity written across the tarmac at 200 miles per hour. In that sense, the resolution of this story isn't about which rider changed the game more, but how the combination of Rossi's artistry and Marquez's intensity created a template for MotoGP's modern DNA. The enduring truth is clear: when two icons bend the rules so far, they become the new rules. The sport itself evolves, and today's champions are living proof of that transformation. The evolution of MotoGP riding styles through Valentino Rossi and Marc Marquez offers more than just a tale of two champions. It's a blueprint for how the sport reinvents itself under pressure. Rossi's early 2000s approach showed that style could be substance, that moving differently on the bike could yield real-world gains in tire management, braking confidence, and cornering stability. Marquez, arriving a decade later, went further, proving that outrageous lean angles and elbows to the ground technique could win championships and force engineers to recalibrate what was physically possible. For fans in the US, the takeaway is that MotoGP today is fundamentally different because of these two men. What you see in every modern race, the exaggerated body positioning, the breathtaking saves, the way riders treat the motorcycle almost like an extension of their own limbs, traces back directly to their influence. If you're considering following MotoGP more closely, or even riding on the track yourself, it's worth appreciating that these styles didn't just happen. They were forged by risk, vision, and the relentless pursuit of speed. As for ownership relevance here in the States, the lesson isn't about copying Rossi or Marquez on public roads. That's neither safe nor practical, but about understanding how high-level innovation trickles down. From training methods in US track schools to the design of sport bikes available at local dealerships, echoes of their styles are everywhere. The aftermarket industry reflects it too, with gear and setups emphasizing body flexibility, lean angle clearance, and electronics that let riders experiment with limits once reserved for professionals. Availability is straightforward. You don't need to chase a factory prototype to feel their legacy. Even entry-level supersports and track days here carry fingerprints of the Rossi and Marquez era. Reliability concerns are minimal in this context. It's not about whether your machine can mimic them, but about how you as a rider adapt your approach. The bigger picture is cultural. MotoGP has become a spectacle that US fans now demand to watch live, online, and on demand, because the riding itself is part of the theater. What Rossi and Marquez did was more than win. They set expectations. And that's the key point. Styles evolve, Legends retire or recover, but the DNA of their influence remains embedded in every rider who lines up on the grid today. The final word? Riding style is no longer just a choice. It's a language, and thanks to Rossi and Marquez, MotoGP speaks it louder, sharper, and more spectacularly than ever before.